So in this video I'm going to analyse why Manchester United's tactical setup is the main issue right now. I'm also going to suggest a solution to fix it involving a back five, which is what Ruben Amorim will almost certainly be using when he does take over in a few weeks. So here Chelsea have possession just inside United's half, and to be honest I'm so sick of this 4-2-4 defensive shape. It just gives me the tactical ick every time I see it. It just doesn't look right, especially because both Ten Hag and now Ruud van Nistelrooy have been using Marcus Rashford in this left-sided midfield position, and as you can see here he's in a pretty deep position, which may be okay if it was just this particular situation, just something temporary, but we see it over and over again. And I'm going to explain to you what the actual issue with having Rashford in these sorts of areas is. But before I come on to that, I should say that even though I don't like this particular defensive shape, there are some good aspects that we saw from United in this Chelsea game. First of all, you can see Reece James has possession and Garnacho is positioned perfectly here. He's sitting in a narrow position alongside the central midfielder and Bruno Fernandes on his inside, cutting off that passing lane into Cole Palmer behind him. And even here, as the ball gets circulated back to Levi Colwill in the centre, you can see Rasmus Højlund is actually taking up a perfect position. Under Ten Hag, I thought Bruno Fernandes and Højlund were being instructed to press far too aggressively for the midfield line behind them. If Højlund was positioned about 5 yards ahead, positioned alongside Bruno Fernandes in the trigger press, whilst this would allow him to apply pressure to the centre back as soon as the ball goes across, which is what Ten Hag wanted this United side to do, then whilst this would allow him to get over to Fofana as soon as he receives the ball, it would open up the passing lane from Levi Colwill into Romeo Lavia behind him, and this is the main thing I see as a difference out of possession from Van Nistelrooy to Ten Hag. Van Nistelrooy, and rightly so, was instructing Bruno Fernandes and Højlund to be a lot less aggressive with their trigger press, or at least if one of them goes, the other one holds a deeper position as Højlund does here, which cuts off the passing lane into Lavia behind him. And so this forces Chelsea to constantly circulate the ball, but crucially it keeps the ball in front of the Manchester United front and midfield line, and I do think both Rashford and Garnacho have been well instructed and do get their positioning right a lot of the times in these positions. As you can see here, it's not just Højlund cutting off the passing lane into Lavia, but Rashford's doing the same into Gusto, who's sitting higher up in the half space. However, there always seems to be a downside from a tactical point of view with United, and I'm going to explain that in just a minute. But before that, if you want to check out any of the new season jerseys or the club and international retro jerseys, go over to Jersey FIFA. You can check out all their jerseys. They've got a variety of different ones. If you use code Atlantis at checkout, you'll get a discount. A link will be in my Instagram bio, which I will leave linked in the description. So initially in this clip, United do very well with their positioning, cutting off the passing lanes and stopping Chelsea being able to progress the ball through the forward and midfield lines. But the issues start to appear more once Chelsea begin to circulate the ball. And as you can see here, Chelsea are taking up that 3-2 shape in possession, but we can also see that Cole Palmer has drifted from the left-sided half space into a wider position, which is going to cause United issues. Once again, Bruno Fernandes and Højlund are still doing a good job of holding their position and cutting off the passing lanes into the players behind them. Cole Palmer has moved the ball on and he's now moving into a central position, and you can see United are sitting off in that 4-4-2 shape. But the thing that Maresca's Chelsea do very well, which I just don't think United do under either Ten Hag or Ruud van Nistelrooy, is they stay patient and intentional with playing through the centre. You can see Levi Colwill recognises that Chelsea can't keep circulating the ball because they're not getting any progression, and so he plays a quick 1-2 with Caicedo. But now we can start to see the issues, as United in this phase of play look like they're set up in a 4-1-4-1, with Casemiro holding a deeper position, looking to pick up Cole Palmer in that left-sided half space. But the issue I have with this is, why not just play a back five? I mean, Casemiro is sitting higher than Palmer, he's not really dropping into the back line. Why not just play a back five and have the right-sided centre-back able to sit behind Palmer initially? If he moves into a deeper position, then the right-sided centre-back can push up, and because he's coming from a deeper position in the back line rather than from the midfield line, Palmer's always going to be in front of him, whereas with Casemiro he's constantly having to look over his shoulder, and so he ends up not really sitting in line with Ugarte, but not deep enough like a right-sided centre-back would be to fully pick up Palmer. It seems like he's doing a 50-50, and this time Chelsea's strategy of being intentional with playing through the centre does pay off, as Colwill plays a fantastic midfield splitting pass into Cole Palmer's feet, and now as Cole Palmer receives the ball, you can see that United are essentially in a back five, and this is why I've been saying that United should just switch to a back five system, because it just makes more sense. And if you had a right-sided centre-back, say like Leny Yoro when he comes back, instead of Casemiro in this position, I just think it avoids a lot of confusion that you have with Casemiro constantly having to look over his shoulder, not really knowing whether he should drop off or push up, and it would just make things a lot less confusing, a lot more simple and easier to follow for the players, which is going to reduce individual defensive mistakes. I just feel like in this 4-2-4 defensive shape that United have been using under both Ten Hag and now Van Nistelrooy, the midfield double pivot become far too disconnected to the front four ahead. And the reason this is a tactical issue and nothing to do with the individual players or laziness like some pundits or commentators want you to believe, is because I actually think the players are carrying out their defensive instructions pretty well. I mean here, if we look at Rashford for example, as Caicedo has a ball, a player who was just lazy and lacked defensive awareness would probably hold a higher position. Rashford actually knows that he has to cut the passing lane into Malo Gusto behind him in the half space, and you can see him take up this narrow position, which stops Caicedo being able to split him and Ugarte and feed the ball into Gusto in the half space. But here is a perfect example of the issue, as once again United do well to stop Chelsea working the ball in behind their midfield, but once the ball goes out wide, because it's Ugarte who's been putting the pressure on Caicedo, and Rashford's duty to hold that narrow deeper position to stop the ball going into Gusto, once the ball goes out to Noni Madueke on the right side, because Mazraoui has to push up with him, now it's Rashford's responsibility to track the run of Gusto, who should be making an underlapping run between the space that's been created between Mazraoui and Martinez. And so now we're in a situation where even if it is temporary, because Rashford has now done his defensive duties and diligently followed Gusto's movement, now he's in a position that resembles a left-sided centre-back, with Ugarte sitting ahead of him. And this is exactly why when you think about the chances that Manchester United have had this season, the majority of those big clear-cut chances aren't falling to United's best finishers. And a lot of the reason why is because Rashford's being asked to do a lot of defensive work and he's ending up in these sort of deeper positions, which is just not optimal because when United do win the ball back and do look to transition quickly, Rashford, having done his defensive duties, is far too deep to actually cause a threat in behind the back line, and the same goes with Bruno Fernandes. You want Bruno Fernandes being the player to pick up the ball and thread that pass for Rashford in behind. Instead it seems to always be Højlund who's receiving the ball and Garnacho making the run ahead, and this is why I'm looking forward to Amorim coming in and using a 5 at the back system, because it's going to take a lot of the defensive responsibility off of Rashford and allow him to hold a higher position out of possession so that he can actually be effective when United do actually win the ball and do want to take advantage of the space. But it's not just the positioning of Rashford which is an issue, but also the positioning of Ugarte and Casemiro. But just quickly, before I come on to that, if you do want to sign up to the Patreon, you can get access to unreleased videos, and I've changed it from the Telegram group chat to an Instagram group chat because I got banned from Telegram for some reason. So we'll be doing the live in-game analysis for all the Manchester United games on Instagram, so if you do want to check that out, you can sign up to the Patreon. I'll leave it linked in the description, the eye above, and on the end screen, and also in the comments section as well. If we roll this clip on a bit, we see that United actually do well to get back into position. Ugarte forces Caicedo backwards, and as the ball gets played back to Wesley Fofana, because Ugarte and Casemiro are being given the instructions of following the players in the half space, they become stretched and look at the amount of space between them. And as Fofana's going to play the ball back to Levi Colwill, you can see Bruno Fernandes and Garnacho are about to initiate the trigger press, which is something we've seen from Van Nistelrooy and Ten Hag, but the issue is that Ugarte and Casemiro behind them are not just far too deep, but also far too wide. And so even though Garnacho and Bruno Fernandes apply pressure together, and Bruno Fernandes is cutting off the passing lane into Lavia behind him, because of how disjointed the press between Manchester United's double pivot and the front four is, it's only a matter of time before the space opens up and Chelsea are able to play through United. Colwill wants to get the ball into Lavia, and so he plays a pass into Caicedo, who knocks it off into Lavia's path, and now you can see the amount of space that Chelsea have. Højlund, Bruno Fernandes and Garnacho are all taken out of the game. Rashford is still in this deep left-sided centre-back type of position, and even if you had Mainu in there alongside Ugarte, they would both still struggle, but with Casemiro, he's just not got the athleticism to make up this sort of ground. And so as he moves to engage Lavia, Palmer just runs off the back of him, and Chelsea are able to just completely play around Casemiro with a pass into Jackson, out to Palmer, and now Chelsea have been able to work the ball into United's defensive third. And this was a consistent theme in United's defensive shape. Here Fofana's going to play the ball to Colwill. As instructed, both Bruno Fernandes and Garnacho are going to apply pressure together. And you can see it's an instruction because Bruno Fernandes is looking over at Garnacho. Garnacho knows what he should be doing. They're both applying pressure. But now, because Ugarte has been instructed to follow Gusto in the right-sided half space and Casemiro instructed to follow Palmer in the left-sided half space, they're far too deep and far too wide. And look at the massive amount of space in behind United's front four. And so once again, Chelsea are able to pretty simply play through United. Ball goes into Reece James and he's able to split Bruno Fernandes and Garnacho. Casemiro has been pulled all the way out onto the right flank with Palmer's movement, and but for Bruno Fernandes' work rate here, Lavia would have been able to turn and drive through the centre of the pitch. But Fernandes and Højlund show their work rate and industry in the centre of the pitch, and Højlund's unlucky not to win the ball back. However, now you can see that Casemiro is all the way out here with Palmer on the right side, the middle is completely vacated. And as Caicedo turns with the ball, you can see the amount of space between Casemiro and Ugarte. But once again, Bruno Fernandes shows how good he is out of possession and is able to stop Caicedo driving through Ugarte and Casemiro. And to be honest, this positional setup out of possession would be bad enough if it was Mainoo and Ugarte, but with Casemiro in there, it's laughable because he's just not got the legs to cover that amount of ground, and I thought Chelsea were pretty poor at exploiting that space. If they had someone like Ruben Loftus-Cheek in central midfield, I mean, he would have been able to turn and just drive through the centre constantly. And so United were actually fortunate that Chelsea didn't have this powerful ball carrier in their double pivot. And so my solutions, first of all, go to a back five, as Amorim almost certainly will, which I think will improve United just because it's going to make everything a lot simpler. You're not going to have Casemiro and Ugarte constantly having to look over their shoulder, to drop deep, to pick up the players in the half space, and then being tasked with pushing up high in order to keep the vertical compactness in the press with the front four. And also by having an extra player in that back line, this is going to take the defensive responsibility off Marcus Rashford on that left side and enable him to hold a higher position out of possession, because that's where you want him. If you're going to have two players furthest forward, then I would much rather have Bruno Fernandes and Rashford there than Højlund or Garnacho, because Bruno Fernandes is better at finding those through balls than Højlund, and Rashford has better movement in behind the back line and is a better finisher than Garnacho when running through on goal from the left side. And these are clear tactical issues, nothing to do with individual players working harder or the mentality of the squad or whatever excuse is next. It's a tactical issue, and that's what Amorim has to solve.